Hello folks, and welcome back to my channel. I am back with another Halloween card video because it's October. We're ramping up to Halloween now, and I'm just getting real spooky over here. This card features a set from Trinity Stamps, which is a company I've never really tried before, but I just saw the skeletons were so cute, I had to use them in a card. So I am starting off with some black paper here. It is a 110-pound cardstock that I am specifically using because I want a thicker paper that's not going to be warping as much when I use heat on it, because I'm going to heat emboss my little skeletons here so they're nice and solid and shiny. So I'm putting that in my stamping press as well as all of the skeleton images. I'm also laying down some of that anti-static powder tool onto my cardstock so I don't have any static going on. It'll make embossing easier. I'm going to stamp out my images using some Versamark clear ink. Sometimes I use the Simon Says Stamp clear ink, just something that's clear and that's going to be sticky for my images. Once I'm happy with inking them up, I'm going to press them down onto my cardstock, and then I'm going to sprinkle this embossing powder on top. It is the Ranger Super Fine Detail White embossing powder. Again, it just sticks to everything really nicely. It's a nice quality embossing powder, so it's going to produce a really nice image once I heat it up and melt all of the little particles and stuff like that. And here I am using my heat gun to go ahead and heat up the embossing powder I have sprinkled on. I'm gonna let my embossing gun kind of heat up before I start, trying to heat up the paper. I want it nice and hot. This will kind of reduce warping, and then I also recommend, using your heat gun on both sides of the paper. This again will kind of pull the warp in both ways, so it's not as noticeable and it's not as obvious. I mean, I am going to die cut these images out later, so it's not a big deal, but I'm trying to reduce the amount of warping that I can get. And I only did 3 of the skeletons, so I'm gonna go back and do this last skeleton here. It's the same process as the other ones. I'm embossing it with white white embossing powder, and then I'm going to cut all my images out with the coordinating dies. And here are what my images look like now that they're all heat embossed and set. I am just taking a clean towel that's not wet, and I'm just kind of rubbing off all of that excess anti-static powder tool, and then I cut them out using the coordinating dies. And I'm going to cut out my card panel here, so I'm using some white cardstock, and I'm using my paper trimmer to cut it out to 8 1/4 by 3 1/4 inches. This will be the innermost panel where I'm going to do some ink blending. And as you can see, it's the perfect size for all my little skeletons to fit on, so it kind of worked out perfectly. I just couldn't pick which skeletons I wanted. I had to use them all. So I'm using this magic mat here. It's one of those magnetic boards you use for stenciling. I'm going to use a semi-permanent adhesive to kind of tack down my panel so it's not wiggling around while I'm trying to add all my inks onto it. And I'm using Distress Oxide inks to ink up my background. So I'm using more of a purple color scheme. It's almost a monochromatic card, but it's not really. I don't know. It kind of is. I'm using lots of purples. So, because it's Halloween, it's such a great Halloween color that I've been kind of gravitating towards lately. So I am using Shaded Lilac near the very bottom for a lighter purple. I'm going to move that up into some of this Wilted Violet, which is a little bit darker, my medium shade. And then I'm going to use Villainous Potion at the top because it's just the perfect chef's kiss, Halloween color. It just ties the whole card together and adds that spookiness to my background. To set my scene here, I am adding just a couple trees just for interest and because I think they look really nice. So I'm using the Birch tree stencils from Lawn Fawn. This is one of their newer stencils and I just think it's perfect for just fall cards, winter cards, just any kind. I love the little birch trees, they're so cute. So I'm using my magnets here to hold down the stencil. I'm only stenciling 2 to 3 on each side. I'm not covering the whole card base, although you could if you really wanted to. And I'm going over my stencil with some of the Distress ink in Black Soot. It's just nice and dark and it works really well for my Halloween card here. I don't want these trees to be the focal point, I just kind of want them to meld into the background, and that is why I chose black in particular. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that on the same, or on the opposite side, just stenciling my little trees in. Once I have my trees all stenciled in, they're very stark on the cardstock, which is fine, but just to add more spookiness to the card, I'm taking that Black Soot and just lightly inking around the top portion of the card here. I'm not worried about the bottom because I will have a little grass piece going on there, but just to kind of blend them in at the top and kind of bring it all together, I'm just adding that Black Soot around. And then of course we're going to add some splatter to this card because it hides mistakes, it makes everything shiny, it just pulls it all together. So I'm using this Distress Mica spray in Fortuneteller. They're just so shiny and so pigmented and they dry with kind of a texture. It's very interesting stuff and I love the way it looks, and it's purple, so it works for what we're doing. So I'm spraying some onto my glass mat and then I'm going to pick that up with a clean paintbrush and flick it all over my background. And then I'm also going to use the Distress spray in Black Soot. As you can see, I'm spraying it right now. And then I'm going to splatter that onto the background as well. Trying to keep that more around the edges and stuff like that because it is darker. And then once I'm done with all my splatter, I'm going to go ahead and let everything dry nicely off to the side. Next, I am taking the Grassy border die from Lawn Fawn. It's just this simple straight line of grass, and I'm also taking this scrap cardstock. It is longer than the panel that I have, so I know my grass will fit, and I'm just trying my best to cut it straight. And I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine twice, lining it up in the middle because this die isn't long enough for my card. It's not, over 8 1/4 inches long, so I'm just trying my best to match it up in the middle and then running that through my die cutting machine twice, and you can't even tell that I had to do that. Like, it's very seamless and everything, so. To fill out my scene a little more here, I'm going to be using some of the dies from the Spooky Scene die set from Hello Bluebird. It's like a staple for Halloween cards. I always use this die set at least once or twice while making Halloween cards because I like the images. So I'm taking those little gravestones as well as these cute little bats, and I'm going to use those just to kind of fill out my scene a little. So I cut out a few bats, I cut out a few tombstones. I believe I ran those dies from my machine twice. So I have 4 tombstones and 4 bats, just because I like to have more than to have less. And then I'm going to go ahead and start assembling my scene. There's not a lot to assemble, so it's very quick. I'm taking that grass piece and I'm going to glue it down onto my card panel using some of this double-sided tape, because the double-sided tape is super sticky. It's going to be nice and stuck down. And I'm also using some of that Lawn Fawn liquid glue pen on just the little blades of grass, because I also don't want those peeling back and stuff when people are taking this card in and out of envelopes. I want it nice and stuck down. It's not going to move. And then just lining this up by eye, trying my best, and cutting off any excess on the edges. So as you can see here, I've kind of laid out some of my elements. I'm trying to figure out how I want my scene to look. So I have these 3 little tombstones. I felt like 3 looked better because, the eye is just attracted to odd numbers. But I guess in the sense of my story that I'm trying to tell with this card, it doesn't really make sense because I have 4 skeletons. I wanted them to look like, they're rising out of their little graves because it's like Halloween and oh my gosh, maybe there's like a curse on them or something. I don't know. But I have 4 skeletons, 3 gravestones. The math doesn't work out, but maybe one skeleton was like an unmarked burial or something. Who knows? It doesn't matter. So I'm gluing down my little tombstones here using some of the Lawn Fawn liquid glue pen, and I'm using that my tweezers to kind of finagle them behind my grass, because I did stick down the grass really well. And then I'm just going to lay out the rest of my elements. So I'm laying out my skeletons in no particular order. I have some of these wider ones on the edges and some of these ones that don't take up as much space in the middle, but there is really no rhyme or reason here. And I'm also laying out my little bats, again figuring out where I want them to go, and then I'm going to glue everything down using some liquid glue. As I'm gluing down my elements, I want things to dry nice and flat, which sometimes things can or can't, I guess, with liquid glue. So just to make sure, I'm using these acrylic blocks that are a little heavier. They're gonna hold these suckers down while they dry, so they dry nice and flat to the card completely while I work on gluing down other things. It's something I do lots when I'm assembling scenes. You can, focus on one side, have the acrylic block while you work on the other side. It just helps hold everything down and make sure your scene doesn't fall apart and everything is where it should be. With my scene mostly done, I'm going to need a sentiment to kind of tie it all together. So I'm taking this sentiment that says Happy Halloween from the Shake Your Bones stamp set, which is the stamp set that has all the skeletons and stuff I was using earlier, and I'm going to be heat embossing it, and I'm using that Versamark clear ink to stamp out my sentiment, and then I'm going to use a purple embossing powder. This one, I don't know the brand, it's a Sense one, so it's a scented embossing powder that we've had for forever, so you don't have to have a scented one, it's fine. Mine smells like grape. But yeah, just any kind of purple embossing powder would be cool. I think a metallic one would be really pretty as well. I'm going to heat that up with my heat gun and then die cut it out using the coordinating dies. The die set for this also cuts out all the sentiments for this from the stamp set, so like that's pretty cool. I am taking this purple piece of cardstock. This will be my card base that I will glue my card panel onto. So I'm cutting it to be 8.5 by 7 inches, and then on the 7-inch long side I'm scoring it at 3.5 inches. So this is the standard slimline card base. And then I'm going to use my bone folder here to just make sure everything's nice and folded and flat. Before I move any further with assembly, I'm going to stamp out a sentiment on the inside. So the sentiment, or the real charm of this stamp set, was some of the sentiments, they're just so funny. So I just had to use obviously the punny ones because I love a good pun on my cards. I love jokes. So I'm stamping out the image or the sentiment that reads, "I hope you find this card humorous." So good. There's a whole bunch of other ones in this stamp set that kind of make it like an all year round one. Like you could really make kind of skeleton cards for anyone, any time of the year. It's great. I'm also stamping out this handmade by Madison stamp. It's like a custom one. My mother lovingly got me for Christmas, so I'm stamping that on the back. I do that on all my cards, whether I show it in the video or not. It just kind of ties the card together, and I love adding that little handmade by, note on the card. And then I'm going to mount down my panel here. I'm using some foam tape because it's going to stick down nice and flat, and it needs that dimension to kind of add something to the card because I feel like it is simple, but it's a nice kind of simple for me. I struggle with simple cards. I like scene cards and I like to have them as busy as possible, but this one's a little less busy. You know, the color palette's very muted, it's all one color. It was just a really nice card to make because it's so simple. And that is just, you know, one color, one stamp set. Nice. And then I'm going to try my best to kind of get that as evenly on the card as possible. To finish off this card here, I am taking the sentiment I had die cut earlier, and I'm going to glue that down to the very top in the middle, just in the center as best as I can using some liquid glue. And it really stands out because it has that white border around it, and all the skeletons stand out because they're nice and white. I feel like the card has lots of balance in that way. Next, I am taking a white gel pen, and I'm just going to draw little eyes on my bats. They really meld into the background here, but I just figure adding some white gel pen eyes is a really simple way just to add a little bit more detail to my little scene here. And it just kind of makes the bats have so much more character. And to round off the card, you gotta add your sparkle. So I am using, these are from Studio Katia. I think they're the Onyx crystals. They're these really pretty black crystals that kind of meld into the background. They work with the color palette and bring the whole card together. With all these gems, that kind of finishes off the card. So I would like to thank you so much for watching. If you're still sticking around, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, share. It's all a great way to help support me and the channel. I also have an Instagram link down below if you would like to follow me there and see what I'm up to. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.